Kristin Bowen, as you know, the deputy chapter leader for the Missouri chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Like many parents with young children, Kristin Bowen was devastated by the Sandy Hook tragedy in 2012 and outraged when Congress failed to act in the months following. A longtime supporter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, Bowen decided to get off the sidelines in the gun violence prevention movement and founded the Columbia Group in 2015. In addition to her volunteer work with Moms Demand Action, she has worked for over 25 years as a book editor, college composition and literature text, and a developer of online content. Kristin is the mother of two and has lived in Columbia since 2004. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for inviting me to join you all today. I want to, before I get started, talk about who I am for just a second and introduce my friend and my fellow volunteer in the Columbia Moms Demand Action group, and that's Katie Terry, who's on the call with us today. Katie and I often work as a team. Katie was with me at the beginning of the founding of the Columbia Moms Demand Action group. She serves as our spokesperson and can talk about all of the ways that we do this work in our state. So thank you for joining me today, Katie, in particular. And I want to also say, before we get started, that I welcome questions. I'm going to talk about the different topics that we were invited to discuss. And so before we pivot from one to the next, if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I'm happy to pause and take questions at any point. So as Kathy mentioned, I did get involved in this movement because I'm a parent. I am a mom to two boys, and in the summer of 2015, when I decided to start the local moms group here in Columbia, it was at a point not unlike now. There were many high-profile, horrific mass shootings in the headlines that summer. And I felt like I couldn't look my sons in the eye anymore every time a shooting occupied the headlines and say to them that it was going to be okay. It felt like time after time, shootings take over the headlines and adults, lawmakers, do nothing. So I refused to let my kids see that I was okay with that, and I got off the sidelines and started my group in 2015. And I want to talk a little bit to you all about what Moms Demand Action actually is and how we work, because I know some of you have heard this before and you follow what we're doing, but even though we are the largest grassroots organization working on gun violence prevention in the country, people do have ideas about how we work and who we are that aren't quite complete. So I want to start there, and I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if this works. Can you all see my screen? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking up. Okay. So, one of the important things to start with whenever we talk about the problem of gun violence, and I appreciate very much the invitation to speak now when this is so much a part of the national conversation, but the fact is, every day, more than 110 Americans are killed with guns and hundreds more are injured. And many of these tragedies are not making headlines, especially when we're talking about gun by suicide or gun deaths that occur in Black and Brown communities. So it's really important to underscore Moms Demand Action is working toward a goal of ending gun violence in all of its forms. I also always want to take a moment to acknowledge anytime we gather. I know that many of you on this call today may have been personally affected by gun violence. And we work in this organization to honor the victims and survivors of all forms of gun violence. And I want to thank you, if this issue has touched you personally, for just being on the call. It's also specifically an honor to join you all today. It's 1 week after exactly Wear Orange, which is National Gun Violence Awareness Day. We honored the 8th annual National Gun Violence Awareness Day last week. Each year on Wear Orange weekend, we pay homage to everyone who's affected by gun violence. And as an act of solidarity, we come together in hope to rededicate ourselves to this work, and to think about the 40,000 plus Americans who are shot and killed every year. So every single day, we're talking about the loss of mothers, fathers, sisters, friends gone or forever changed, and it's unacceptable. And we did honor Wear Orange here in Columbia last weekend and across the state in a somewhat different way this year. And I want to talk about that briefly in a second. But I also want to point out, that we're talking again via Zoom. We know COVID has changed the way we work. Many organizations, including Moms Demand Action. We also know that COVID-19 has really intensified the gun violence crisis in our country. Firearms are now the leading cause of death for kids, for children and teenagers in our country. We also are aware, as we're talking today, that the scourge of white supremacy, armed white supremacy, continues to threaten our communities, specifically communities of color, and our democratic institutions. So we know that this work is really so important at this moment, and we have to work to stop what's going on. So the phrase we use in Moms Demand Action is that we honor with action. So here's a photo from last week when our new mayor, Barb Buffalo, signed a proclamation declaring it National Gun Violence Awareness Day in Columbia, Missouri. She gathered with moms and some students, some local students who are, by the way, also re-energized and activated on this issue in ways that we have not seen in years. Came together in a way to honor Wear Orange, but what's different this year is that we are at a very, very specific moment where we're doing advocacy at the same time that we're honoring survivors. So on Wear Orange this year, we also engaged new supporters and our current supporters with a message for the Senate, for the United States Senate, to say, don't look away. I've got a placard behind me. Don't look away is the hashtag for our moment. Don't look away from our country's current gun violence crisis. It's time for our Senate to do their jobs. We cannot stand idly by while our children, our brothers and sisters, are living in fear. So we stood up in Wear Orange in Columbia with just this small event, but you may have seen across the state were some very quickly organized, enormous rallies that happened in both Kansas City and St. Louis, with lawmakers present, with community partners from communities most impacted by gun violence, coming together to say, right now, we're going to take Wear Orange and do something different because the world is watching what's happening in the aftermath of the tragic shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde and so many others. And we just can't look away from the heartbreak that we're feeling. And for some of us, myself included, the anger, right? This is an angry moment. So today, Katie's going to help me stay on track, I hope. We're going to talk to you today a little bit about who we are as an organization, how we take action. We're going to talk about some of the huge numbers of supporters who've joined our movement just in the past several weeks briefly, and invite you to join us in taking action because we have work that everyone can do. We're going to touch briefly on our legislative work, both here in the state of Missouri and on the federal level. And I know Kathy had invited us today to come and talk about, and Pam, you mentioned it, talk about the work we're doing to encourage strong gun sense legislation on the federal level, but they're connected. So we're going to talk about both. We're also going to talk about upcoming work that's kicking off actually this month to elect gun sense candidates. That's our elections work. And I didn't mention this in my introduction, but my role in the Missouri chapter in the past year has changed. I'm I'm working with the chapter statewide, and my areas of responsibility include legislative work and elections work. So I am the volunteer leader with sort of the most hands-on view into what we're doing around elections. So I really want to talk to you all about that. And we're going to touch briefly because the question was also raised on the U.S. Supreme Court case decision that is expected this month dealing with gun regulations. And of course, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we can talk about the significance of that decision briefly too. So as I said, if you have questions as I go, please feel free to raise your hand. And hopefully if I can't see it, Katie can see it and she'll wave. Yes, first question.
I had a question on the stats.
Yes.
The gun death stats, all those numbers seemed low to me. It said those were deaths in America in 2020. Was that thousands of them?
So we're going to talk a little bit more about data in a second, but yes, just to be clear, when I talk about our data, Moms Demand Action is very much a data-driven organization, and we use crime statistics and death data from the CDC and other, the FBI and federal sources. And the most recent reliable information that we can rely on ends in 2020. So our data about the country and Missouri, which we're going to talk about in a second, relates to those numbers. And unfortunately, I think when we look at this again next year, we're going to see that 2020 was a remarkable, horrific year for gun violence, and the data will definitely trend and look different after 2020 data is added in. But the number, 110 people shot and killed every single day in this country, that has also risen in recent years. I'm sure that will also go up. And I will say, when I started this work in 2015, that number was 87, and it's gone up significantly by a margin every year to where we're at 110. Hi, Adrian, you have a question too?
Yeah, the federal government has a pretty limited system on keeping track of guns and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Is the FBI numbers even accurate?
Well, it's what we have, and one of the reasons that we don't attempt to put any kind of extra spin on our numbers is that we know the opposition would use that. So we want to say that these are the official numbers. The other thing to say, I want to be clear when we talk about Missouri, we talk about gun death data over a period of time and we average it. So typically every Town for Gun Safety, which is our umbrella organization, will take a 5-year set of data and average. So when we talk about Missouri, for example, we talk about our state being the 6th highest in gun deaths per year. And that has to do with averaging it over time. And the reason we do that is, unfortunately, when there is a horrific mass shooting, for example, the shooting in Las Vegas or a school shooting, those numbers for a particular state will look really different in 1 year. And statistically, that's not as reliable a way to look at the sort of bigger picture of what's going on in a state, if that makes sense. So yeah, I appreciate your point about the FBI, but that is what we work from. Okay, Dave, your hand is still up. Is that it? Sorry.
Sorry, I forgot to lower it, but I'm still.
That's okay.
The numbers on that whole stat looked low to me. Like only 186 children and teenagers died by COVID in 2020. I'm wondering if that's a number. That's number of thousands. Sometimes it said, but I don't see that note on there. Just all those numbers look low to me. It was something maybe to check into.
Nope, that's what we have. Yeah, every Town for Gun Safety. I will look into it though, because it's an interesting question about COVID, where they got that data from. I'm assuming it's similar.
Must have been pretty early in the pandemic.
Yeah, well, this is a very recent slide, so I will look into that. It's a good flag. Thank you.
I would say don't forget, children weren't prone to death as much as the elderly when they got COVID.
True.
That's all I wanted to add.
So just another minute about who we are and what we do, and Katie, join me here if you see something that I'm not remembering. So one of the reasons that we want to talk about the specifics of recent mass shootings and data is to sort of reinforce we all are aware that gun violence is a problem wherever we are in the political spectrum, but to anchor it in some pretty alarming numbers. And we're going to talk about Missouri numbers in a second. But we are also, it's important to stay confident in our ability to make a difference on gun violence. We know that gun violence is preventable. And we know this because we've seen policies in place in states that show this. And we've also seen that our work on this issue as volunteers is successful. So just to back up for 1 second to make sure everyone's clear, we are a nonpartisan organization. We are the grassroots movement working to reduce all forms of gun violence throughout the country, but we are part of Everytown for Gun Safety, along with Students Demand Action, the Everytown Survivor Network. We have about 8 million supporters across the nation. We are very strategic in our work, which just means that we support evidence-based solutions and strategies to reduce gun violence, evidence being key in that phrase. We are very much a multifaceted organization that relies on different strategies to combat gun violence at the local, state, and federal levels. And we also work on shifting the culture. So we know in a state like ours where we have a culture of responsible gun ownership, it is really important to acknowledge and work with community leaders and community organizations to continue to foster responsible gun ownership through safe storage and things like that. In Missouri, so I think the last time I talked to you was a year and a half ago. We have a different number of local groups than we had before the pandemic, where we were about 20 local groups in every corner of the state. We're about 11 local groups now, including a virtual group that captures people who live in small towns where we don't have an active moms group working. And we do coordinate statewide on our issues and hold monthly statewide meetings that are virtual, just like this one, that anyone's welcome to join. Katie, I think I got that. I think I got a pretty good snapshot there.
Yep, absolutely. I would also just mention very briefly that moms, dads, uncles, aunts, cousins, people with children, people who are child-free, moms is in our name, but we welcome all comers. Also, as an organization, we do support the Second Amendment. We're even in leadership in Columbia. We're gun owners and non-gun owners, Republicans and Democrats. We really try to focus just on the issue. And as we're based in Missouri, we are respectful of the hunting and gun culture that is Missouri, but we're trying to make our state safe for everyone. Yes.
So as Katie mentioned, we work with gun owners. We have gun owners in our leadership team. And one of the ways I'm just going to highlight really specifically on this slide, one of the things that we do in this state that's so important is to reach out to families and communities about secure gun storage. We have a program called Be Smart, which is an acronym. The SMART stands for Secure All Guns in Your Home and Vehicles, Model Responsible Behavior Around Guns, Ask your friends and people who interact with your kids whether their guns are secured in their homes. The R stands for risk, which means recognizing the role of that firearms play in suicide. And T stands for just telling your peers about this program, which I'm doing right now. It's a safety program that we do that we bring to PTAs, church groups, medical professionals, anyone who will have us really. We have trained volunteers who go out in the community and give these presentations without the red t-shirts. We go in, we check politics at the door because we can all agree that there are very simple things that we need to be doing to keep kids safe. And it's not about our politics. And it's a really successful, really important effort that we have in our state. One of the things that is so important, we talk about gun homicide. Often it's the thing that we talk about first in Moms Demand Action. But we really have, in the past several years, been trying to sort of level up our work to support community partners around gun homicide and also to shine more of a light on gun suicide in our state. And we're going to talk more about this later. We've also increased our work in recent years to identify, support, and elect gun sense candidates for office. So we launched the Gun Sense Candidate program starting in 2018 for candidates who were willing to make gun safety a campaign priority. In 2021, that was actually a real record year for us in engagement in that program. We elected Gun Sense candidates, people who had that distinction. You can think of it sort of like the way the NRA gives a letter grade to candidates after they answer a questionnaire. Moms Demand Action offers a questionnaire to candidates to get a distinction. So it's not a grade, it's just sort of a check mark. And in 2021, in races up and down the ballot, we awarded 550 candidate distinctions, which is 3 times more than we did in 2019. So we are really leveling that work up, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute as well.
Kristin, could I just add something about the Be Smart
Sure, yeah.
organization? So one of the things we really work to do is educate adults about safe gun storage in the home. We're trying to shift the dialogue. People talk about accidental shootings, but if you've left a gun on the top of your stereo or in the drawer by your bed that's loaded, and a child or a grandchild or someone in your home gets access to it, it's not an accident. That was an entirely preventable shooting. And so trying to hold parents accountable for safe storage of weapons in their home is really a shift we're trying to make. And we do, Kristin mentioned we present at health fairs. It's very interesting who comes up to our tables, and we often give away gun locks in concert with the Columbia Police Department. But it's something that people don't think about, having unsecured guns in the home. And so we're really trying to create awareness about that, and hold adults responsible for weapon storage in the home.
Yeah, it really is. Every time we have a table that's a Be Smart table in the community, there's never been a time when we've done that, Katie, that I haven't had a conversation with somebody where you can see the light going off, and they're realizing, and they'll even say, I left a gun on top of my refrigerator because my grandson, is small, but I realize he's getting bigger, and that's not secure storage, right? So these are conversations that can really save lives. It's so important in our state, especially in rural parts of the state. It's what we lead with as a movement, but it's also important here in Boone County for what we do. I want to talk about some Missouri information here, some Missouri data, and talk about it because one of the underlying ideas here is that policy, common sense gun safety policy, matters. It makes a difference. And unfortunately, Missouri is an example that is held up in scholarly literature as a state that's sort of a test case for stripping gun laws and seeing the effects going in the wrong direction. So just really briefly, a little history. In 2007, lawmakers repealed our state's law requiring background checks on all handgun sales, making us the only state in the country to do so at that point in recent years. And then in 2016, many of you may remember, against very strong opposition from police, from various law enforcement, and over Governor Nixon's veto, lawmakers enacted permitless carry. So that's a law that allows people to carry hidden, loaded handguns in public without a background check, without any training whatsoever or any permit. So after the repeal of our background check laws, our state saw a 25% increase in the gun homicide rate and a 16% increase in the firearms suicide rate. But here are the real numbers for right now. So I'm going to share with you, this is taken from a resource that is called EveryStat. Everystat.org is the URL. Maybe Katie can drop that in the chat. There's a specific set of data that Everytown for Gun Safety has compiled. This is the data that we bring when we go to meet with lawmakers. When we had a meeting a couple years ago with Caleb Rowden, we put this in his hands and we say, look, this is not partisan data, this is just the data. And here's what it looks like. In the last decade, significant changes were made to Missouri gun laws, and here's what we see. Our gun death rate in Missouri is up 70% since 2011. Which is just outrageous. And that has made us, in that 10-year window now, we are number 6 in the nation for gun death. That's also, by the way of comparison, it's a 33% increase nationwide, which is also not great, but 70% is where Missouri lands. We are rising much faster than the national average and most other states. We also, specific to Missouri, and this chart shows this as well, Missouri's rate of gun suicide has increased 37% compared to a 12% increase nationwide. So what we're seeing as a result of the weakening of our gun laws is pretty clear. It's pretty stark. If you're interested in a much deeper dive into the data, including information about how much this costs the state of Missouri, again, that's at everystat.org. If you're interested, and I know we are the Boone County Democrats here, on Everystat, you can dive into different looks at the data. In addition to what it costs our state, we can look at the rate of gun death in particular counties. Missouri, the larger city counties are obviously at the top of the list, but Boone County is up there, unfortunately. So again, for a deeper dive on that data, I would encourage you to take a closer look at everystat.org. There are also links there to ways to look at gun violence in our state by congressional district, by sort of data around, women and children, domestic violence, and communities of color. So there's a lot to dive into. And I want to just share that before we talk briefly about the work that we're doing to work for gun safety laws, because this really is the conversation that we should be having. So you all probably know that Moms Demand Action volunteers go to the Capitol. We look to work with both Republican and Democratic lawmakers, as well as other public interest groups and community partners who share our goals to reduce gun violence and promote gun safety to pass legislation. In a typical year, which this has not been, we meet one-on-one with lawmakers in their districts or virtually. We write and we call and we advocate on specific bills. We hold an advocacy day every February, typically, where we bring hundreds of volunteers into the Capitol. Our most recent in-person advocacy day was 2020. This picture in the middle is more what advocacy day looked like for us this year, which is to say we had virtual meetings with over a dozen lawmakers, mostly supportive lawmakers, and we did a lot of work on social media. But we also, in addition to our online work, we were in the Capitol this year. And in every year since 2016, we have been a big presence at hearings. The picture on the left is me, actually, taken at the hearing for SB 666, which is aptly numbered. It was a bill that was dubbed by the Missouri prosecutors as the Make Murder Legal Act. It was a bill that I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But the important thing is, we have not slowed down. Our state, the landscape for us in Missouri on legislation makes every session a nail biter. So this is what it would look like in a typical year over time. We really have grown to be this incredible force in the Capitol. This was 2020 when we were last able to be there in person. We do expect to go back to the Capitol in the next session. But I just want to pause here for a second and talk about the victory that we had this year in our legislative session, because we count it as a victory. It feels like a victory that no bad gun bills were passed this year. We defeated a bill that would have armed teachers, which would have it's already legal for schools to arm teachers in Missouri. This bill would have added new categories of school staff who could have loaded firearms in public schools. We defeated that. We defeated 4 different stand your ground expansion bills. That was the picture earlier that I shared of the hearing on SB 666. But there were 4 different variations on what we call a shoot first bill. And then there's also the perennial Guns Everywhere bill that was defeated again this year. It's been brought up every year since I've been going to Jefferson City for this group, and it lost again. This is a bill that would have forced concealed carry to be allowed in sensitive areas, the few remaining sensitive areas that are in statute, things like daycares, bars, hospitals, amusement parks, places where college campuses, places where guns are not going to aid in anyone's safety. Those restrictions remained in statute, so that was defeated, as well as a bill that became sort of an omnibus bill that would have allowed guns on public transportation, so trains and buses, and also in churches. Those were the priorities that we worked on this session, that we testified against or showed up in big numbers with testimony. We had volunteers take over 400 different legislative actions. We had multiple events across the session. And so if you took an action with us, I want to really make a point here to stop and say thank you. If you submitted testimony online to the Senate or to the House, I can't remember now, I've got it backwards. One house allowed online testimony and the other chamber did not. But we did have success. And so one of the things that is really important to note about this success is it fuels what we do next, right? We take this this energy as fuel for our fight. Oh no. Sorry, hold on, I'm gonna mute myself. Katie, can you speak for a second while my mail carrier delivers the mail?
Yeah. I'd be happy to. Just to interrupt the current flow super briefly, one thing I would say that's the differentiator for Moms Demand Action is that we're an action-based organization. So we consider you a supporter when you take an action with us. We don't have yearly dues. Or anything like that, like so many organizations, your PTA, the League of Women Voters, et cetera. When you take an action for us, you become a member of Moms Demand Action, and that is writing your senator, attending an event, giving testimony, anything like that. So I'll go ahead with the questions. Pam, I think you were first.
What about the bill that was passed a year or two ago, where our state will not follow any federal gun laws?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the federal nullification bill. That is still the law. We have untold members of law enforcement, both federal and local, who are fighting against that. I'll let Kristin speak to it, but it's a great example of the kind of, I'm just going to say, nonsense that goes on in Missouri and that we have to fight against. Yes. That, we all should be rowing in the same direction on gun safety, and that's volunteers, legislators, police, and laws like that really don't do anybody any favors.
But our governor was a sheriff.
Yes. And this was a very political move calculated to address Washington. So in public comments, the governor has said maybe we should take a look at the SAPA, they call it, Second Amendment Preservation Act. But he really has not said anything meaningful about re-examining that bill, and it is being litigated about that law. I just want to say really quickly, that wasn't my mail carrier, that was Shemin at my door canvassing me. So we'll have to talk another time. How funny is that I'm on with you all and I'm getting canvassed at the same time. So I know that there are other questions.
Yeah, two more questions. Adrian was next, and then Herb, I think. Or other way around.
The legality of that law, where they can't bypass federal law. So is there any court proceedings going ahead to nullify that?
Yes. So Everytown for Gun Safety, along with sheriffs from multiple counties, not including Boone, unfortunately, but mostly on either side of the state, are litigating that law. So I don't have any information about a timeline for that. Unfortunately, I think it's going to take a long time. There was a lot of talk at the time that it was sort of a grossly and obviously unconstitutional measure, but extremists really set the agenda on that bill and pushed it through anyway. I don't know if you all saw the story on 60 Minutes. I mean, we got national attention for this very outrageous law that would punish law enforcement for doing anything to interact with federal law enforcement on a federal gun regulation. And it's not just sort of enforcement of federal laws, it's also things like the crime gun registry. Lots of things have ceased in Missouri since that law was enacted. So it's pretty dire. And it also means, by the way, a serious defunding of cities like ours where there were joint crime task force in place doing the work of preventing gun crime. So I think that we don't know what the timeline is, Adrian, on those cases, on those legal cases, but they are moving ahead, and it hasn't been slow. So that's encouraging.
I would also just add very quickly before we take the rest of the questions, which we're happy to do, is that another important point about that is that elections have consequences. So those are our legislators in Jefferson City trying to nullify Second Amendment guarantees and keep the federal government from working with local officials. And as Kristin said, it costs us money, it costs us time, and it definitely costs us lives. So we mentioned being an action-based organization, but that is something you can really help us with. That's not okay for our legislators in Jeff City to be working on things like that when we have so many other issues facing us.
Yeah.
I think Herb was next.
Last night's House committee hearing brought together for me something relating to gun safety legislation that I had not put together before. And that is that the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, who used various kinds of weapons and numbers to break into the Capitol, leading the charge of the mob, did not carry with them firearms, much less automatic weapons or advanced large capacity magazines. That point was remarked earlier by journalists who investigated it, especially at time of the Oath Keepers indictment. And it was said that they brought large quantities of weapons, including automatic weapons and magazines, to the vicinity of the Capitol and stashed them across the border in suburban Maryland and Virginia. One person, Terrio, the leader of the South Florida Proud Boys, apparently forgot 2 high-capacity magazines in his pocket and got arrested and jailed overnight the night before the break-in. Imagine what that event would have been if the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and perhaps others had led the assault with AR-16s.
I have a thought about that, Herb, that actually relates to what we're talking about here in Missouri, which is that, I sort of touched briefly on these stand your ground expansion laws that were defeated this year. They represent true extremism in our legislature. And one of the things that really is alarming as we, in doing legislative work in this organization, should be looking at for next year is that these bills, by the way, just to define what they are, Missouri is already a stand your ground state, which means people in the state don't have the obligation to retreat when they're encountering someone, and they can use deadly force if they choose. These bills that would expand on it allow a person to use deadly force against a person who unlawfully enters, remains after entering, or attempts to unlawfully enter a dwelling, residence, vehicle, or private property lawfully occupied by such a person. So then that bill was filed, then 2 more bills were filed this year that were somewhat more moderate. What's alarming about this is that this was happening in other states around the country at the same time. These things are not unique to Missouri. What it means is they're going to do it again. So the ability for people to, in these places, sort of as we saw with Kyle Rittenhouse, claim that they were feeling threatened or self-defense is a real risk. And I think that it is why we have to always show up to fight these bills, even though, I want to praise the coalition of groups that showed up to oppose the most extreme version of Stand Your Ground expansion this year. It was not just moms. It was Missouri prosecutors. It was law enforcement voices. It was the NAACP. It was Missouri Faith Voices. It was a huge coalition of people saying no. And I will say, because it's important to say, as we're talking about victory in Missouri, what victory really looked like in that case was a bill getting a committee hearing in the Senate. And typically what we see with dangerous gun bills is if they get scheduled for a committee hearing, they're going to get voted out of committee. That's what always happens. This year, that did not happen. Republicans took votes to vote that extremist bill down. And it was one of the most extremely emotional and fraught hearings I've ever participated in. It was remarkable to see senators on the Democratic side really put their feet down and say no, and Republicans join them. That's encouraging, but it doesn't mean we don't have to show up next year with the same sort of intensity, because I think what you're describing, Herb, this idea of people, armed extremists, who are not just in Washington, some of those extremists came from here in Missouri. We need to have laws that protect us from that kind of thing happening here. So thank you for letting me make that connection.
Forgive my follow-up. The main point, I thought, was that this phenomena, if it's supported by the data, suggests that sensible gun safety legislation, and the District of Columbia has more such than most states, any other state I know in the country, work, even to an extent, with extremists. And I thought that was important to underscore the significance of the effort of those promoting gun safety legislation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the things that we have been working on nationally, we're going to talk about our federal work next this year, especially, but in the last couple of years, is fighting against making it easier for armed extremists to do what they're doing, to escalate what they're doing. And so that's where the federal work comes in. But I see that we have lots of questions.
Yeah.
So maybe let's take a couple more questions about Missouri legislative advocacy and our recap, and then we'll jump ahead.
Carl, you want to go? I think you've had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for the vital work that you're doing here. I mean, despite some of the frustrations I think that you have on a national level, and perhaps some persuasion that you can offer, and the considerable successes that you've had on a state level to prevent bad gun legislation here. I kind of represent the municipal level,
Yes.
even though it's nonpartisan. And I know that the mayor has obviously tried to help with the proclamations and so on. And I suspect there is support on the city council as well. What suggestions do you have for us? What can we do? Everything is supposed to be, and I think your group is as well, kind of a bottom-up kind of an organization. And from a municipal perspective, we're kind of a bottom-up organization. What can we do to help?
Wow, thank you, Carl. I was planning to talk about our local work on city gun violence prevention, because that's sort of how we label it, city gun violence prevention, and I should define what that means. So we talk about specific categories of gun violence, whether it's firearm suicide or unintentional shootings like Katie was mentioning. City gun violence just refers to the idea that there are preventable forms of gun violence that happen at a higher rate in certain communities. It doesn't have to be a city. But when we talk about our team working on the issue, we have actually, during the pandemic, really kind of doubled down on our local work, trying to build coalitions with community partners in parts of the city that are most impacted by gun violence, and trying to bring sort of some of the information that we have about policies that work and the importance of setting policy from our national organization, Every Town for Gun Safety, which also, I should have mentioned, includes Mayors Against Illegal Guns, which is a national network of mayors who, it once included Mayor Treese. I hope soon it will include Mayor Buffalo. they share policy and they share experiences and they share sort of insights into what's working. So the first thing I want to do, Carl, is have a follow-up conversation with Mayor Buffalo and make sure she can take advantage of this network and of these resources. I know that you have spoken in council to us because we're also very present in council in new ways that we hadn't been before in the past year, advocating for violence prevention at the local level and what that looks like. And one of the things that I would encourage people who are interested in this work to do is to get involved with local Columbia Moms Demand Action, because we have a separate Facebook group where we talk specifically about who's doing work, how we can have an impact. I see our role, generally speaking, as sort of being able to bring resources to bear and to bring, to shine a light, to talk to the media, to use social media to talk about what should be happening and what might work. We don't have definitive answers and we can't be like service providers, but we can do advocacy. And so I would love to talk more with you, Carl. If we want to have coffee, maybe we could talk about what that would look like for you on city council. I think that would be brilliant.
You bet. I'll extend the invitation. So.
Thank you.
Donna,
Awesome.
Do you have a question?
Oh, I think it's Alice, and you're muted, Alice.
Okay, and Donna Kessel also has a question, but is not unmuting.
That's
okay,
Alice.
I just wanted to, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello? I just wanted to make sure Kristin had time to talk about the federal Supreme Court decision and how it could affect other states. I'm really startled by that. So I just want to make sure she mentioned she was going to talk about federal.
I will make sure to save time.
Yeah. Because we have we go to 1:15.
Okay. Alice, Al and Mary Jo, do you have a question?
I had a question, but perhaps you'd like to respond to that first, and then I'll ask my question after you've talked about Donna's question.
I'm going to skip ahead then. Well, actually, you know what? No, I'm not. I want to talk about this really briefly because this is really important. And it's the call to action I want to share with you all today. Wherever you are on this issue, there's really simple things that I'm going to ask you to do with us today. You may have seen that we delivered 5,100 petitions on June 1st to the local offices of Senator Blunt. That was on behalf of the entire state of Missouri. We needed to talk to Senator Blunt's staff about him doing his job. So we delivered a petition that specifically was calling on Senator Blunt to pass the strong leader of the ATF that we need, Steve Dettelbach. That was specifically one of the parts of the petition, but we're also asking for gun safety legislation. His staffer was very kind and met with us. We had tons of media attention. The senator's office gave a statement. He is open to bipartisan red flag law happening, which is why we chose to go to Roy Blunt's office. Behind the scenes, our national leaders knew that Roy Blunt was one of 13 senators around the country who was persuadable. It may be because he's terming out, we don't know, but we did know that it was important to have him hear from us. So I'm going to talk to you at the end of our minutes together about work that you can do. I want to also, because we have so many candidates, make time to talk about what a gun sense candidate looks like and what this means. We have a gun sense candidate on this call, and that's Adrian. This program is something that allows candidates to show voters that they will stand up for gun safety and allow us to do work and support them. The eligible races this year are different from years past. It includes positions from the local to the state to the federal level. So everything from school board to county offices all the way up to the Senate. Those candidate positions are all eligible. I want to share this URL with you. This is gunsensevoter.org. Maybe Katie, if you could drop that in the chat as well. This is where you can go and search to see if your if your candidates for different levels in different offices have received the distinction. So this is not an endorsement. Any candidate in a race is eligible to seek the distinction. It's a very quick survey. We are right now about to launch in earnest. Next week, actually, on Thursday, we're having a statewide kickoff where we're going to really launch our elections work in earnest, where we're going to join together as a state with leaders to sort of form teams to identify our priority races across the state and to plan the work that we're going to do. Really quickly, there is another category of Moms Demand Action support, and this is for people who are frequent volunteers or former leaders. So right now in Missouri, we only have a few endorsed volunteers who are running. You'll see Suzette and Shemin are both on this list. They both are frequent volunteers. Suzette was in fact in leadership for our group. Jessica Piper is a former local group leader. I'm sure you've all heard of her. She's a rock star. So I went through that very quickly, but I want to make sure that you all get that link. And if you're a candidate or you know a candidate or you'd like to support a candidate getting this information so that they can inform their campaign and the work that they do in office around gun safety, please don't hesitate to contact me. I will need just their email address and what race they're running for, but I'm really looking for the Muleskinners to help us identify candidates who should be getting this questionnaire. Now, Alice, if you're still there, I want to answer your question really briefly by recommending that we talk briefly about the Supreme Court decision, which we know is coming down soon. I want to share a link to this Everytown article. It's a very quick Q&A to help you understand if you're wanting to dive into more detail about the case. It's New York. It's a New York-based case, but basically the Supreme Court's about to rule on something that will have very broad implications for gun safety. This decision does not mean an end to gun safety and gun violence prevention laws. This is a very specific decision about the public carry of weapons. So it, in fact, will not impact us very much in Missouri, where our laws are already some of the weakest in the nation. But if the Supreme Court does rule the way we expect that they might, we are very concerned that more people will be shot and killed. Devastating shootings will definitely be more likely. The Supreme Court will force people with this ruling, if it goes the way we expect, to weaken permit systems. So the system to allow people to have permits in states that include, I have a quick list here, California, Delaware, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. So not Missouri. These are some of the states, though, that have some of the lowest rates of gun violence in the nation. So this ruling will have a really serious impact. It will matter very much to those states. It also represents some different interpretations of the Second Amendment than we've seen before, which is alarming. We will obviously be organizing around this when the decision comes down. I can't predict what that's going to look like yet, but I do encourage you to stay informed. In that it's 1:16, I want to share our main call to action today. This is really important. I want you, if you have one, and you're not using it right now, to Zoom, to join me and thousands of other volunteers across the state and across the country to call attention to the need for action in the Senate. This is the call to action right now, is to text the word BOLD to 64433. That's our main phone number. If you text the word BOLD, it'll ask you to call your senators to tell them to take action. We are tracking the number of interactions that we have. We use that information. So I know we shared earlier the direct line to the Senate office, and if this tool is jammed, which it sometimes has been, we've had so many people using it, you can certainly call the old-fashioned way. But if we can tell how many people we have calling, we can use that information to pressure Senator Blunt. We had our meeting with him here in Columbia on behalf of the state chapter. There were also students from Mizzou. There's a new Students Demand Action group on campus at Mizzou that's just formed in the wake of these mass shootings. It's very exciting. And their new leader was in Washington this past week getting trained, and she met with Senator Blunt's staff as well. We need to really keep the pressure on, so please join me in taking that action. If you're ready to volunteer and join Moms Demand Action, the easiest thing, I know Scott has asked me about this. There are lots of people texting me, messaging me, all channels asking, and Katie too, how to get involved. The easiest thing if you're ready to join this movement, is to text the word ready to 64433. And those are the immediate actions, but we do have a couple more ways that you can get involved. There's the new member meetup that we talked about at the beginning of this meeting. That's if you want to get time alone with a volunteer and find out about the different work that's available. If you have 5 minutes, if you have 20 minutes a week, we have something for you to do. So that's June 26th. Next Thursday, unfortunately, at the same time as Bob's kickoff for his fundraiser, I'm going to have to see if I can do both of those things. That's going to be Thursday night. So if you're interested in doing elections work with Moms Demand Action, what we do this year is going to look a lot like what we did the last big cycle, which is a lot of canvassing, a lot of texting and phone calling. We do a lot of phone banking in Moms Demand Action. We recruit people to our own events for candidates that we're supporting, and we also do postcards. And we also, obviously interact with candidates and attend their events. So that kickoff is next Thursday night. And the other thing I just want to pitch really quickly is our summer series. This is something that was put together really quickly in the wake of the Uvalde shooting. If you have 20 minutes a week, this is for you. There's a link here that I hope to drop in the chat as well. What it means is if you have, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I'll drop it in, Kristin.
Yeah, thank you. If you have just a few minutes a week, there's a video to watch and an action to take, and the whole thing together takes 20 minutes. It keeps you in the loop of what we're doing, as there's a lot going on right now. And I can't figure out how, there we go, stop share. So that's what I would share is if you want to take baby steps into getting involved in this movement, we are very strategic about how we ask volunteers to use their time and get on our list, and we'll connect you to work that you can do. I see that there are lots of questions, or there were, I don't know who I missed. Dave, there's two Daves. I don't know who had their hand up first.
Yeah, I'm hoping you'll. I think I'm a gun sense candidate. I believe I gave you my email address at Earth Day. It's on the back of the brochure. Dave Riggle at Gmail. I'm actually very easy to find. I could respond to pretty much anything everybody else had to say, but I'm not. The most important thing is that you somehow and I get together. I'm on your side.
So thank you, Dave, for reminding me. We are staffing up before Thursday to have volunteers locally who can do all of that data work. If you're interested, anyone on this call, we are looking for more people to join the elections team in Columbia. Our usual leader for that work is doing lots with the bail fund and is super busy, so we need help. But we haven't lost your information. I have you on my list.
Right,
Dave, thank you
Taylor?
so much.
Yeah, my question is quick and simple. When are you running for Congress?
I have 2 teenagers in my house I need to deal with first, but thank you. Thank you for that. I know I talked really fast. I think maybe we lost Alice. I hope I answered the question that you were raising, Alice. I am very concerned about the Supreme Court case as well. But I think it's really important. One of the things that we have to remember is these things are connected, and the importance of having success in the Missouri legislative work that we did has to translate into some energy to elect more candidates in Missouri, because until we really elect new people and send them to Jefferson City, we're really not going to make change on this issue the way we need to. There are not enough of us in Jefferson City making change. So it's really important that we have more people doing this elections work, and I'll be sure to, if we have more big events, to give them to you all so you're aware and they're on your weekly agenda. I think that was everything I wanted to cover. Katie, I talked so fast. What did I miss?
We're both available all the time. We have one-on-one conversations, and we're happy to help any of you get involved in any way you can.
Yeah. Lots of ways to find us on momsdemandaction.org. If you drill down, you can find ways to stay in the loop with us, to follow us. And after the Uvalde shooting, we did something we've never done before, which is make our private Facebook page available for search. So if you aren't part of our private Facebook page where we do a lot of organizing, you can find us if you search us on Facebook. I will put a asterisk next to that. We are not allowed to have candidates who are currently running for office in our private Facebook page because we have to avoid any appearance of, what's the word, collusion?
Partisan.
No. Yes.
I would also just add very briefly that in the past week, we've had over 6,500 new Missourians reach out to get connected to Moms Demand Action. I'm on the call team for the state of Missouri, so we are reaching out to all of those people. If you join, you might get a phone call from me. But I mentioned the one-on-one conversation, so we're really making sure that everyone feels they have a home with Moms Demand Action.
Yep.
Do either of you have time to quickly address the question Mary Jo and Al put in the chat about automatic weapons?
Oh, thank you. I didn't see that. Gun ownership is acceptable in our hunting state, but I'm concerned about semi-automatic weapons sales, which are not necessary. That is an excellent question. Thank you for flagging that, Kathy. So we, until President Biden was elected, talking about semi-automatic weapons and high-capacity magazines was not the top priority for our organization, but President Biden has really made it a cornerstone of his approach to this issue. So we do talk now more about regulating those kinds of weapons. I will say the reason that we don't lead with that, it's important to note, is that the overwhelming majority of gun deaths are not related to those kinds of firearms. They're just not. It's handguns. And so we're not talking about taking away people's ability to own different kinds of weapons lightly, right? And when we prioritize what we talk about, it wouldn't be assault weapons or assault style weapons, or, you know, we don't want to get hung up on gunsplaining, but you know what I mean. So we are taking a new position on regulating assault weapons, and that is that we really do need to study and take a long, hard look at what these weapons are doing. And I will just say personally, after what we've seen this week from the community members in Uvalde, in particular the pediatrician or the doctor who would to treat the bodies of those children, I think this is a conversation that we really should be having, is the effects that these weapons, these really dangerous weapons are having on people's bodies. So our official position is that these weapons are made and sold to people who shouldn't have them, violent extremists in particular. It's a favored weapon, and we are talking about them as weapons of war, which is what we saw in Uvalde. And so I'm grateful to see our national movement is kind of moving to have this conversation. I will say politically, maybe some of our candidates could speak to this. I think it's a very fraught conversation politically. Adrian, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I do. The military style weapons ought to be taken. There's no reason for them. I think you could put them in, gun ranges and maybe check them out within the presence of a professional who's been trained properly that can go over those guns and be safe. But these guns are tearing. I mean, you're talking third graders now. They're not meant for anything but military use. Get rid of those guns.
I want to say thank you, Adrian, for again being a Gun Sense candidate, and I really am grateful for your questions and your thoughtful approach to this issue. And I'm grateful you're in this fight.
Kristin, are you in the 47th district? I don't remember seeing you on my list.
I am not, so I don't know why Shemin was at my door.
That's a pretty good idea.
Anyone else? Dave, I think you have your hand raised. Yeah.
Yeah, two things. AKs, ARs, they ought never have been released to the public. I've made this point. I was taught how to use one when I was in the service. They're for idiots. They're for mass industrial killing. The hard problem now is that given there's 4 or 5 million of them that are floating around,
yes,
what's to be done about them? Right. And paradoxically, I've got one because my political enemies do. That this is where we're at. This is the kind of stuff I would be talking about if I had more of a forum. Second thing is, I didn't quite follow what you said about the Facebook page, because I'm following the moms group, so I'm getting something, but I'm not getting the private page. Okay.
So there's a public facing page, which is where we share big events and news stories about gun violence in our state, and we sort of reflect back the work that we're doing. That's public and anyone can follow, and I encourage everyone to follow, because that's where the calls to action like the National Call Your Senator are going to be shared. Privately, we have a group in Columbia. We've got about 500 members of our local Facebook group, and that is private. What is it called, Katie? Private Como. Let me just make sure I don't screw this up. But Dave, if you're currently a candidate, I can't recommend that you join, because we would have to say
right.
no.
That's what I was making sure, because I am following something, but I didn't know what. I wasn't sure what I was being told I couldn't join.
Yes, you can't join that one because we don't want to. They consider it a resource of our organization.
Sure. No, I get it. I get it.
But it's tricky because sometimes we like let those people back in and then we push them out. So it's nothing personal.
Most things aren't.
No.
I just wanted to make a comment that another thing that I think we need to look at is, this is Kathy Jensen. Another thing we need to look at is the outrageous advertising that the gun manufacturers and gun sellers are doing to target kids with these assault weapons, and to say things like, get your man card, and things like, I think that is just obscene. And I think that needs to be addressed. We need to, this kind of advertising just should not be going on.
Yeah, so
it's similar to.
I completely agree. And Kathy, I think one of the things that we have to remember is that we are making a difference when we pressure private businesses. Like, remember when Dick's agreed to stop selling weapons, and when Walmart changed their policy about what kind of weapons they were selling. I think that at moments like now, when we see that, unfortunately, the two shooters, these 18-year-old boys, were able to legally purchase these weapons, right, in one case, right before, committing these horrific acts. We've got a problem with our retail environment. I mean, we're talking specifically in moms about right now, because it's part of the national conversation about legislation that we need. We need a background checks bill at the national level. We welcome a red flag law that Senator Blunt is talking about, but we also really need an ATF director. We have had deliberate obstruction of leadership of that agency, and one of the problems that it creates is that sort of these bad faith sellers of firearms are allowed to exist. Recently, just this year, I think, I'm not sure when this happened, but Kansas City had a case that Everytown for Gun Safety got involved with and invested some effort in through their legal fund. They helped to bring a case against a gun dealer in the Kansas City area who had lost his license but sort of reopened under a different name and was selling guns that were straw purchase guns, meaning, people were buying guns and then reselling them to people who couldn't legally have them. And there was nothing happening from the ATF. So Everytown got involved, and that case was, they were successful. So this person has now no longer allowed to be an arms dealer to criminals in Kansas City. But that kind of work, when you have an ATF that's not being led appropriately and is underfunded, is so much harder, right? And so we want to support, people's Second Amendment rights, people who have a legal right to buy firearms. But look, I think there's no reason an 18-year-old should be allowed to walk into a store and the next day commit a horrific school shooting with a firearm that they could so easily purchase. So that's a bill that we didn't talk about, but the idea of raising the legal age to 21 is something that could happen on the federal level. It's been passed in the House. It's not passing in the Senate probably, but we've had this conversation in Missouri. They tried to lower the age this year from 19 to 18. This is why we have to sort of connect these things and always be vigilant, even on sort of tertiary gun bills that are happening in Jefferson City. We can't have these things happen. It's just, there's absolutely no reason for it. So anyway, that's my soapbox about 18-year-olds having weapons of war. Pam, did you have a question?
Yeah, what about the bullets that explode?
Yeah. Do you mean at the Uvalde school or?
Yes.
Those? Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean.
And they're in a high capacity magazine, is that correct?
high capacity, that particular caliber. Yeah. I'm not a gun expert. I'm not one of the leaders of our group who's a gun owner, so I defer to someone else who would like to talk about what that means.
But it seems like that could be outlawed.
I mean, look, here's the thing. We get into a very challenging political landscape when we start talking about outlawing certain things. So we start with things that everybody can agree on, right?
Sure, like I know.
Ghost guns are a good example. Ghost guns, I don't know if everyone knows what that is. It's the concept of like a kit that you can buy on the internet. Violent extremists are pivoting to buy more of these weapons and assemble them at home because they're not, in some cases they have criminal background. They couldn't pass a background check. So we can say, why make it possible for people to create a firearm with no serial number that's not traceable, that's available online, that sort of disturbed teens are buying for themselves over the internet. Ghost guns should also be an area where we can all agree. So we start with that conversation rather than talking about the particular ballistics involved. I think we lost Katie, so I'm going to say, I think Adrian, you had your hand up first.
I just wanted to make a comment about the commercials that get put. Campaign finance laws will have a big effect on that. If I'd like to put a sense down onto super PACs, and those super PACs are dark money, non-traceable, and they spend $1 million to beat me in super PAC. So that's a part we can do on the backside that's real important, and it will affect many issues.
Did you say $1 million?
Almost $1 million, yeah, in 2 elections. Yeah, I'm definitely the threat to Republicans. I can guarantee that.
Well, they must have had a really strong candidate if they needed to spend that much money. That's amazing.
About out of time. Dave Rayfield has his hand up. Dave,
I don't know if I'm belaboring the obvious, but the Federal Society and the NRA are all about providing to their militia fantasies the weapons of war. Ghost guns are for criminals and assassins. They have no public utility whatsoever. Just to belabor the obvious, I will be making that point any place I'm at where the issue comes up. Other people can talk about the details of gun safety. If white rural Missourians want to own half of deaths as suicides, I guess that's just them. I'm not going to argue they shouldn't own a pistol to do that to themselves. I am going to argue that weapons of war ought not to be in anybody's hands, and I am going to argue anybody who's got a gun can't give it or sell it to anybody without a third person verifying it's a safe thing to do. All right. Ass tight. All right. I don't know how else to describe it. Gun regulation that's gnat ass tight. Right. But the reality is there are crazy people who think they're going to have a civil war.
Well, I think what the reality is that they are extreme. They are very extreme. And a lot of voters, I think if they knew how extreme, would be shocked. Even Republican voters in rural parts of our state, if they knew what lawmakers were really describing, they would be shocked. And the fact that extremists set the agenda on gun laws in our state is what we see when we're in the hearing rooms. We see paid lobbyists. The NRA kind of picked up and moved out of Missouri a few years ago. The NRA is not really the lobbying arm of what's happening in our state. It's an even more extremist organization called the Missouri Firearms Coalition, which is part of a for-profit network. These brothers called the Dorr Brothers, DORR. They come in and they set the agenda. They give these bills to the extremist lawmakers who carry them. And they come and they testify and they bully, and they are truly out there. I mean, they say things that are just, I don't know if I'm on Twitter talking about this all the time, but there was even a question this year about the ability for, if you follow this argument to its logical, its conclusion, where any private citizen should be able to own any weapon right? What's the limit? Can a private citizen buy a tank? Can I have a nuclear weapon? One lawmaker asked that question of the paid lobbyist from the Firearms Coalition, and she didn't skip a beat. She said, any weapon that the government is allowed to own, I should be allowed to own as a private citizen. And he said, nuclear weapons too? He said, yes. So, I mean, we're not talking about just garden variety, big gun lobby agenda for our state. We're talking about truly extreme, out there people who are setting the agenda. And so my hat is off to all the candidates who are interested in serving in Jefferson City. Thank you for running, and thank you for continuing to work against that extremism, because it's breathtaking. Thank you, Kathy, for being here, for being Kristin, for being here and speaking to us on this hot topic issue. Yes. Obviously, a lot of questions and stuff. We are way over time, so we need to wrap up our question. But thank you for your time. And thank Katie, since she had to leave. We'll remind everyone, come back next week. We'll be hearing from our 2 circuit judge candidates, and hope you got all the links out of the chat, everyone, so we can contact them and let them get involved however we can. So appreciate it all. We'll see you all next week.